I think that the startup ecosystem in Nigeria has seen a lot of growth in the past 2 to 3 years. And I think the reason is very simple. So in the past 2 to 3 years, we've had a critical mass of young people, innovators and entrepreneurs who have identified specific problems within our local context and have leveraged technology to solve those problems. And once you do that, you reach a point where we call product market fit. And with product market fit comes a lot of chain reaction. So funding becomes easier, access to markets is there, customer acquisition is much easier. It's easier to scale the business and solve the problem on a larger scale and to reach more people. So I think that's what has happened to the startup ecosystem generally in Nigeria, which I think is great.
Yes, I like the fact that I'm hearing this from you, because before now, the story was in the reverse. You know, like they say, some businesses, they don't last for after the first year. You are going to give us statistics because you're an expert in that field. So you mentioned earlier about how they domesticate solutions. Mm-hmm. Can you give us some examples of how some of the startups domesticate solutions, and that's how they were able to attract, you know, investors, they were able to attract the market? Yeah.
The first one I'd like to talk about, of course, one that I'm very proud of is Paystack. Because of course, you know, we invested in Paystack at a very early stage. And one interesting thing that you need to understand with those kind of startups, let me use two, Paystack and PiggyVest, is that they looked at the problems that are being faced locally. And then they use technologies that are being used internationally to solve those local problems. PiggyVest, for example, is what we call in Yoruba, they call it kolo, right? Growing up, my mom would give us these little boxes where we drop money once in a while. They just saw that same problem and decided that, okay, let's look at this thing closer. Right? There's a technology that we can deploy that can make this much more easier, much more scalable, and will solve a problem for a larger masses, especially people who might not be able to interact with the physical device. Also, the physical device has a limit. There's a limit to how much you can put in it, you know. A number of other things. Then they started adding things like automated saving, such that it saves, it helps you save automatically. You know, a number of other things. That's using technology to solve problems within our local context.
I like that. I mean, from what you've just told me, I've deduced that. I think they realized, or they saw that Nigerians, millennials, mm-hmm. and some Gen Zs, and some others that are above that particular age grade have the problem of culture savings, mm-hmm. right? Yeah. The culture of savings was fast depleting in the country. Yeah, and probably the banks were not doing as much as they were supposed to. And so they said, you know what, let's localize this thing, let's bring it down. Because mm-hmm. a whole lot of people would like to probably save for the next rent, mm-hmm. they like to save to travel. And they decided that, okay, this is what we can do to help. Oh, that's actually a beautiful one. That's a beautiful one. Now,
and I was going to say something. Okay. That, you know, one other thing that we need to understand is that when these solutions come in and they identify the problem, those who were in the system before sometimes might not even still see the problem that is being solved. Practical example. Till today, the bank is still very keen on giving loans rather than helping people save. Right? That's why we do not have that saving culture anymore. Because every time you walk into a bank, the first thing they sell to you is you want to take a loan. Because of course, that generates more income for them. So that's the system that they run. But when a startup comes into the scene, the way they see things is usually different because they are seeing it from the ground and not from the top. And that view is really important.
All right. Before now, it's everywhere that startups probably fail a whole lot. I'd first ask, what was your experience as a startup in Nigeria? Was it before the 3 years you talked about, mm-hmm. Where there's an improvement, during or after?
My experience building startups, today I still help people build startups. I still build a few for friends and family, right? My experience before then was that it wasn't easy to get some things done. It wasn't easy to access. The access wasn't there at that time.
Access to, is it funds or what are you
Access
talking
to a lot
about?
of things. Access to fund, access to resources, access
Capacity
to talent.
building, okay.
You know, access to information wasn't there at that time. Right now, you open your phone, you go to Twitter, you see a lot of information, you see grants that are available. We didn't have that at that time. Although, regardless of that, we were still able to build some startups that work, some failed. And that's normal with entrepreneurship, right? But today it's much easier. There is information everywhere. There is funding. In fact, investors are looking for people to invest in today. There's the ready market. The market we have today are what we call early adopters. We have a larger percentage of early adopters today that want to adopt new technology. We didn't have that a few years ago. So a number of things has changed within the startup scene. So it's much easier now. Then it wasn't so easy.
Okay, I'm going to go back to asking you what your experience was, because you've somehow answered the next question I wanted to ask you about the opportunities that exist for startups. I know we're going to go in depth into that, but specifically, what experience hit you so well that made you want to say, you know what, I don't think I want to do this anymore?
The first thing was market adoption. You know, and it's a critical component for any startup to succeed. If you bring in a new product to the market, you want a few people at least to adopt that product, adopt that technology, and give you real feedback for you to be able to improve on it. Because without the feedback, you can't improve on the product. And if they don't adopt and utilize or interact with the product, they cannot give you feedback. So that was a major challenge that I faced. Although we were able to scale that after trying a few things, but it wasn't so easy. We spent a lot of resources, time, money before we could get to that point. The second thing was access to funding, especially funding from investors. And that was a bit more difficult because at that time, people were more interested in investing in things they could see and touch. So they want to buy land, they want to buy a car, they want to buy a house. Nobody wanted to invest in another business that could scale, you know. Look at if you look at it. Fast forward 5 years or 6 years after that, a company like Paystack was acquired for over $200 million. Imagine someone who got into that with a very little investment of say $10,000, $100,000. Imagine how much that person would have had after 3-4 years. So that is to say that at that time, investors were the investors' risk appetite was very low. They didn't want to risk so much, so they preferred to invest in things they could see and touch. Even to invest in their own business or in a family friend's business that they were close to was a problem. So that was some of the challenges that we faced then. So it was difficult to raise money.
The present day startups, what challenges do they face and what can they do to overcome such challenges?
The first problem and the first challenge any startup will face is if you build a product that nobody needs. And that will come from you building a product that is not solving a problem for people. But if you scale that hurdle, there are then another series of hurdles that you need to scale. Another one is, do you have a ready market to adopt this? Do you have the funds to pull it off? Then there are even more complex things, because most times when startup entrepreneurs, when they're starting these businesses, they have the idea, they have the passion, and they just want to get that product out there. You know, they want as many people as possible to buy it. But they don't consider that there are some other things you require to build that business beyond just the product. You need to be able to keep your books, you know, because if you don't keep your books, you cannot show investors how you've made progress in the business. You need to be able to deliver your product competitively, and for you to be able to do that, your raw materials, the costing of your raw materials have to be competitive. If your competitors are buying their raw materials for 5 naira, you can't be buying it for 7 naira, right? You need to be able to understand where all your cost points are, And if you don't understand that, you don't know where your money is going to. So sometimes entrepreneurs think they're making money, but they're losing more than they're making. So there are a number of other issues and challenges. And the truth is, as an entrepreneur, you are not expected to know all of this. That's why it's always advisable to get experts who are, you have to have an accountant, you have to have a lawyer on your side who is helping you to review contracts. Because sometimes we've seen entrepreneurs that get everything right, And in 2 years, somebody comes and takes over their
Absolutely.
business. You know?
Absolutely. It's such an interesting world, right? I was reading something on Tech Point Africa sometime this year, I think it was 2 months ago, and they said, you're going to have to help with the specific figures here now, that in the first quarter of 2021, startups were able to generate more investment, as it would be, than what they did in the entire 2020. Can you take us through this? Because I'm wondering, we had a lockdown, the economy was struggling, we're just recovering from recession. At least we've got a positive, a positive outlook twice, all thanks to, the National Bureau of Statistics who help us with information. Talk to us, how come, that happened?
One thing we must understand is that every one of these funds, I'll call them funds because people have put together the money to invest, every one of them has what we call investment thesis. The investment thesis is what they look at, the way they think about their investment, the things they want to see, the things that matter to them before they invest in startups. In 2020, something very critical happened during the pandemic, which was a blessing for the startup ecosystem. Every time a problem arises, innovators begin to think, and they begin to come up with new products. New ideas starts to flow. That's one. Two is that a lot of these funds still had money to invest from 2020 that didn't go out. Do you understand? Of course, because of the pandemic. However, by the time it was 2021 and things began to ease out, they now began to see the businesses that were able to survive the pandemic and saw that these are the businesses that can survive the next 5 to 6 to 10 years. And then they were able to give those businesses money. That's one side of the story. Another side of the story is the fact that more innovators rose from the pandemic. Because as much as the pandemic was so disheartening, it caused a lot of issues, it also created a lot of opportunities for people. And with that also came more funding into the system.
Wow, that's very interesting. So what are your hopes for startups in Nigeria?
I think there's a lot of hope, but I also think that with that comes a lot of work. I think there's a lot of work we need to do in the startup ecosystem. We need to work more on talent retention, which is a big problem. We need to work more on our policies. Policy is a huge problem right now. And we also need to work more on educating startup entrepreneurs. So yes, there's the opportunities are plenty, it's vast. But with that comes a lot of work that we need to put into the ecosystem. We need to be more deliberate in the startup ecosystem. I think that's what I would like to see in the next few years. And with that, then we can say we have more hope.
Wow.